and sinister appearance. The doors and window shutters are ready to drop from their hinges. Old clothes are stuffed with broken panes of glass, while legions of half-starved dogs prowl about the premises and rush out and bark at every passerby. For your beggarly house in a village is most apt to swarm with profligate and ill-conditioned dogs. What adds to the sinister appearance of this mansion is a tall frame in front, not a little resembling a gallows, and which looks as if waiting to accommodate some of the inhabitants with a well-merited airing. It is not a gallows, however, but an ancient signpost.
For this dwelling, the golden days of Communipaw was one of the most orderly and peaceful of village towns, in which all the public affairs of Communipaw were talked and smoked over. In fact, it was in this very building that Olaf, the dreamer, and his companions concerted that great voyage of discovery, in which they explored Buttermilk Channel, were nearly shipwrecked the Straits of Hellgate, and finally landed on the island of Manhattan, and founded the great city of New Amsterdam.
Even after the province was cruelly arrested from the sway of their high mightinesses by the combined force of the British and Yankee, this tavern continued its ancient loyalty.
It is true, the head of the Prince of Orange disappeared from the sign, a strange bird being painted over it with the explanatory legend of the Wildegans, or the wild goose.
But this, all the world knew to be a sly riddle of the landlord, the worthy Toynus van Giesen, a knowing man in a small way who laid his finger beside his nose and winked whenever anyone studied the signification of his sign and observed that his goose was hatching and would join the rest of the flock whenever they flew over the water, an enigma which was the perpetual recreation and delight of the loyal but fat-headed burghers of Communipaw.
Under the sway of this patriotic, though discreet and quiet publican, the tavern continued to flourish in primeval tranquility, and was the resort of all true-hearted Netherlanders from all parts of Pavonia, who met here, secretly and quietly, to smoke and drink the downfall of Britain and Yankee and success to Admiral Van Tromp.
The only drawback on the comfort of the establishment
Was a nephew of mine host, a sister's son, Jan Joost van der Scamp by name, and the real scamp by nature.
This unlucky Vipster showed an early propensity to mischief, which he gratified in a small way by playing tricks upon the frequenters of the Wild Goose.
Putting gunpowder in their pipes, squips in their pockets, and astonishing them with an explosion as they sat nodding around the fireplace in the bar room.
And if perchance a worthy burgher from some distant part of Pavonia had lingered until dark over his potation, it was odds but that young Vanderscamp would slip a briar under his horse's tail as he mounted, and send him clattering along the road in neck-or-nothing style, to his infinite astonishment and discomfiture.
It may be wondered at why mine host of the Wild Goose did not turn such a graceless varlet out of doors.
But Thomas Van Giesen was an easy-tempered man, and having no child of his own, looked upon his nephew with almost parental indulgence. His patience and good nature were doomed to be tried by another inmate of his mansion.
This was a cross-grained curmudgeon of a Negro named Pluto. who was a kind of enigma in Communipaw. Nobody knew where he came from.
He was found one morning after a storm, cast like a sea monster on the strand in front of the Wild Goose, and lay there more dead than alive. The neighbors gathered round and speculated on this production of the deep, whether it were fish or flesh, or a compound of both, commonly called a merman. The kind-hearted Turnus van Giesen, seeing that he wore the human form, took him into his house and warmed him into life.
By degrees, he showed signs of intelligence and uttered sounds very much like language, but which no one in Communipaw could understand. Some thought him a Negro who had either fallen overboard or escaped from a slave ship. Nothing, however, could ever draw from him the account of his origin.
When questioned on the subject, he merely pointed to Gibbet Island, a small rocky island which lies in the open bay just north of Communipaw, as though that were his native place, although everyone knows it was uninhabited.
In the process of time, he acquired something of the Dutch language. That is to say, he learned all its vocabulary of oaths and maledictions, with just words sufficient to string them together.
Donderheim Blitzen! Thunder and lightning were the gentlest of his ejaculations.
For years, he kept about the wild goose, more like one of those familiar spirits or household goblins that we read of than like a human being. He acknowledged allegiance to no one, but performed various domestic offices when it suited his humor. Waiting occasionally on the guests, grooming the horses, cutting wood, drawing water, and all this without being ordered. Lay any command on him, and the stubborn sea urchin was sure to rebel.
He was never quite as much at home, however, as when on the water, flying about his skiff or canoe, entirely alone, fishing, crabbing, or grabbing for oysters.
And would bring home quantities for the larder of the wild goose, which he would throw down at the kitchen door with a growl.
No wind nor weather deterred him from walking forth on his favorite element. Indeed, the wilder the weather, the more he seemed to enjoy it. If a storm was brewing, he was sure to put off from shore, and would be seen far out in the bay, his light skiff dancing like a feather on the waves, when sea and sky were on a turmoil, and the stoutest ships were fain to lower their sails.
Sometimes on such occasions, he would be absent for days together.
How he weathered the tempest, and how and where he subsisted, no one could define, nor did anyone venture to ask, for all had an almost superstitious awe of him.
Some of the Communipaw oystermen declared that they had more than once seen him suddenly disappear, as if they plunged beneath the waves, and after a while come up again in quite a different part of the bay.
Whence they concluded that he could live underwater, much like that species of wild goose,
Commonly called the hell diver.
All began to consider him the light of a fowl or bird, like a mother carries chicken or storing petrol. And whenever they saw him putting far out in the bay in cloudy weather, made up their minds for a storm. The only being for whom he seemed to have any liking was Jan Joost Vanderskamp, and him he liked for his very wickedness.
He in a manner took the boy under his tutelage, prompted him to all kinds of mischief, ate him in every wild harem scam freak.
Until the lad became the complete scapegrace of the village, a pest to his uncle and to everyone else.
Nor were his pranks confined to the land. He soon learned to accompany old Pluto on the water. Together these worthies would cruise about the broad bay, neighboring straits and river, poking around in skiffs and canoe, landing on remote coasts, laying waste oysters and watermelon patches. In short, carrying on a complete system of piracy. on a small scale.
Piloted by Pluto, the youthful Vanderstamp soon became acquainted with all the bays, rivers, creeks, and inlets of the watery world around him. He could navigate from the Hook to Spiting Devil on the darkest night, and learned to set even the terrors of Hell's Gate at defiance.
At length, Negro and boy suddenly disappeared, and days and weeks elapsed without tidings of them.
Some say they had run off to sea and gone to sea.
Others jocosely hinted that old Pluto, being no other than his namesake in disguise, had spirited away the boy to the nether regions.
All, however, could agree on one thing, that the village was well rid of them.
In the process of time, the good Turnus Van Giesen slept with his fathers, and the tavern remained shut up, waiting for a claimant, for the next heir was Jan Jos Vanderskamp, and he had not been heard of for years.